Well, a new poll from the New York Times and Siena College shows former President Trump widening his lead on President Biden following last week's debate. Trump is up 9 points on Biden among registered voters. The Economist, now the latest outlet to call for President Biden to drop out of the 2024 race. The cover story features the presidential seal displayed on a walker. Titled "No Way to Run a Country." It also points to new polling showing voters in crucial states moving away from the president, warning Biden could lose Virginia, Minnesota, and New Mexico, 3 states he won just 4 years ago. Joining me now is former Georgia Congressman Doug Collins. He was the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. And Doug, you have such an amazing viewpoint now because you are out of office. What do you make of what you were seeing happen right now in Washington?
Hey, good morning, Cheryl. It is amazing to watch here, but I think it's really disingenuous of the mainstream media, especially these now calling for Biden to step down, because they've been covering for him for so long. And they knew this. Look, this was not secret. This is something we've talked about. You and I've actually talked about. Maria's talked about. We've talked about this before. And now for them to all of a sudden, decide that this is the nuclear option, that they've got to get rid of Biden. Frankly, rings a lot of hollow people. But the truth of the matter is Biden is not up to the job. We've known this for a while. The problem is the Democrats, by ignoring this problem and letting it go for so long, have now set themselves up in a very precarious position, because only he can really step down. And even if he does, it's not as simple as just popping a new candidate, even the vice president, into that role. So it's been interesting to watch. I think it's also, frankly, from my perspective, also hilarious to actually watch Democratic comms people actually have to work with the media instead of always just getting fawning treatment.
Well, you're talking about the gaslighting that we have seen from, you're right, from the White House, but also from the mainstream media, who all of a sudden seem to have woken up after the debate, and now they're calling him out for what, you're right, we've been talking about here for months, and Maria has as well. I want to bring in Joe Borelli. He's on set with me. He's got a question for you.
Yeah, Congressman, I mean, you've been in these conferences, obviously, on the Republican side, but what do you think is happening within the Democratic conference? Is there some panic? Are members getting worried that what seats they might have been eyeing as potential pickups this year are now too far gone, given the fact that the person at the top of the ticket isn't going to be dragging anybody by their coattails?
Hey, Joe, you're exactly right. This is the biggest problem. Look, everybody talks about the debate as being the fall of Biden, and I think it is the precipitous fall of Biden, but it's the actual, to me, what has been handled worse than debate is the after debate. I mean, this is political 101. Where have you been the last little bit? And talking to friends of mine on the Hill, Democrats are saying, look, nobody's reaching out to us. We're not hearing anything. And what the White House forgets, it's not just their political future, which, I hold all of the staff who are close to Biden responsible for this. It's not only their political life, it's the life of those members on the Hill and the members in the Senate. Look, going up into this, there's a lot of flowery talk about Hakeem Jeffries becoming Speaker and, the House being flipped and then the Senate maybe being held. Well, those discussions right now, they're just the Senate is definitely looking to flip and the House is looking to hold. So, yes, the aftermath of how badly they've handled the after debate is causing a lot of problems, and you're seeing little breaks in the dam, so to speak, that people talk about. He is saying that he shouldn't run again because they're looking at these poll numbers in these other states, and yes, the top of the ticket does affect.
Yeah, Jerry Willis has a question for you, Doug.
Yeah, I just look at this and I think, what is it going to take to spur some kind of action, right? Yeah, you said there was a slow response from the White House after the debate. Well, what are the next steps here that should be taken? It seems like, and I mentioned this at the top of the show, we could be headed into a constitutional crisis because there's not really a roadmap for this. What do you think?
Yeah, Jerry, I think you're right in this, but I think the problem is you'll never have any of the cabinet members break in that constitutional crisis. I think they're just so embedded with Joe Biden right now. Look, there's two possibilities here. Joe Biden comes to the realization I can't win, and for his own sake and his own family who's close to him, who see the problems that he's struggling with. I mean, this real issue of dementia kind of issue is going to take him off. And then they let it fall where it may. They pick Kamala Harris because I think that's the only one that they can actually pick in the Democratic Party that would actually be sufficient for the progressives and other parts of the party. Or number two, and this is possibly a more likely scenario, He just sort of holds on, and in about 2 weeks, the media gets amnesia, and they just reported on it as how bad Donald Trump would be if he won another term as president. Those of us who actually want to care about our country and us actually support Donald Trump and others have got to hold the media accountable to say, no, you can't ignore what is happening here. So I think they've got really two places to go. The first one being Joe Biden says he wants to get out. The second one being that the media then just forgets what has all happened. He could have quit in October, November, December, when everybody was talking about this. He could have been the Democratic leader and statesman. I'm doing it for my country. Now, if he quits, and this is, I think, what's playing on Jill Biden and Hunter Biden and many of the others close to Joe Biden's mind is he now quits. He looks like a dementia riddled debate performance and system in which he looks defeated. And I think that's something that the perception is what they're looking at.
If he shows up, Doug, in the September debate, he stays on the ticket, and it goes south again, which, let's be honest, it may very well, after what we saw last week, then he's done. All the swing state polls are showing us that Donald Trump is ahead, and now he's building more momentum. Real quick before you go, you mentioned Hunter. I do want to ask you about this because the first son has reportedly been joining White House meetings since after the debate and staying very close to his father. The White House admits that Hunter did join his father for speech prep. Fair enough. But listen to Tennessee Congressman Andy Ogles, who was on the program earlier in the week. Listen to what he told me.
It's no surprise that the Biden crime family wants to stay in power. I think it's probably very predictable that Hunter wants his dad to be in the White House. His best option for protection and immunity going forward is his dad in the White House. And so the moment that you have a change of regimes, you're going to have a change of personnel, and suddenly Hunter is not going to have the umbrella and the protection of his father. It's not a surprise that he's in the room. It's not a surprise that Jill Biden is in the room for a lot of these types of meetings. The president of the United States that is not in control of his faculties. He's not running the country. His advisors are, and which, quite frankly, in my opinion, is a constitutional issue.
Doug, who is running the country?
I think it's been the advisors all along, and then they go to Joe Biden to get supported. It's what it appears to, because, again, he doesn't seem to have the control, especially in the last year and a half, that is to make these decisions. But this brings us up to a great question. Not only Hunter being there, and please just don't let him down in the Situation Room, away from this, but the other issue here is if Kamala Harris is going to be the one propped up here to run, let's just say this actually happens, then there needs to be a lot of questions. Supposedly she has lunch with him every week. She sees him all the time. We hear her talk about this. Look, the only problem is she's the only one rhetorically that makes Joe Biden look good. That's the problem the Democrats have. But she needs to start asking the question, when did you start seeing the president slipping? When did you start noticing? Why didn't you say something? Look, she's got a lot of stuff to answer, and the whole family does right now. And I think that's the crisis that we're in as we go forward here. But again, as going back to, I think Joe was asked this question earlier, the real pressure point is going to come from the Hill. And that'll be from Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer. If he can't keep the Hill and those Democrats, and today I think Tammy Baldwin's not going to be with him in Wisconsin for a campaign event, that is one of the things that really will start chipping away at this possibility of seeing a change at the top.
Doug Collins, it's great to have you on the program this morning.
It's always good to be with y'all. Have a great day.
All right. Have a good Friday, Joe. Good to see you. Excuse me. Got Joe right next to me. I got Doug over here. So many people. All right. Good to see you, sir.